Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on our research unveiling the College-to-Job Initiative. My name is Joe Fuller. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Harvard Project on Workforce and also of the Harvard Business School's Managing the Future of Work project. I'd like to just open with a brief description of our project and to set the agenda for the day. The Project on Workforce is a cross-disciplinary project between my home school, the Harvard Business School, the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and our Graduate School of Education. And our research is focused on the intersection of education to workforce. We formulated the project specifically because we think investigating those questions really requires a multidisciplinary approach. Historical research has tended to be narrow and focused from any one discipline, education scholars studying the education element, policy work being done by our colleagues at the Kennedy School, how employers react to the system being done at the business school. But finding new solutions and doing new and impactful research we thought would benefit from unifying our disciplines and asking broader questions that would benefit from all our perspectives. In this instance, the overarching question that guides our work and inform this research is how can we create better pathways for more Americans of all ages and backgrounds to good paying, household sustaining jobs. Now, the college degree, of course, has been considered the gold standard of upward mobility, but we also see that most graduates are underemployed and that there's a considerable skepticism around the whole topic of whether or not college is, to use a classic American phrase, a good deal. For example, a more recent Wall Street Journal NORC poll found that over half of Americans, 56%, were skeptical that a four-year degree was a good idea. In fact, they labeled it a bad bet. So we launched the College to Job initiatives as one of the projects in our research to investigate the alignment between colleges, the actual alignment between colleges and the labor market, and to explore how we could improve those outcomes for more learners. It's a research and practice initiative. It's about learning what models do work and what are the nuances of those models to facilitate college to career transitions, and building tools that allow us to understand how the market for college graduate clears, where demand is, where supply is, where mismatches are. Our playbook synthesizes the research behind college to career programs and tries to provide a picture of what actions colleges and employers and other stakeholders, including policymakers, can take or support to improve outcomes for college students in terms of employment in the field of study and the academic outcomes they enjoy as a function of putting their learning to work. Let me just mention two big takeaways. For those of you who know some of my other research, the one will not be remotely surprising. It's that employers are too often overlooked as integral players, as partners in this system, and as necessary contributors to solutions to making outcomes better. The challenge for us cannot also just fall on higher education. We've been spending a long time telling educators they had to improve their game, results had to improve, and we haven't been providing them the type of their own version of surround services, but certainly the types of partnerships and alignment with other players, not just businesses, although they're critical, but philanthropy, social entrepreneurs, and of course, policymakers. The second part of the research in this project was to create the College to Job Map, which is the first tool to connect regional higher education and workforce data and allows users to visualize that data through all sorts of different lenses, by the nature of the occupation, by geography, by academic institution. And we're big believers at our project that improving both the quality and the accessibility of data will allow us to do better research and allow those constituents I mentioned earlier to make more informed decisions, or at the very least ask better, more specific questions about what's going on in the labor market, where resources should be deployed, what's bottlenecking people's advancement. Um, The map pulls together data from 7 different public sources and data from our partners at Lightcast, who are, of course, with us today, in a single place to allow researchers to get an integrated understanding and also to help them escape doing the same algebra we've all been doing all the time using the exact same data. So let's make a tool that's accessible to researchers, accessible to decision makers, make it user friendly, and also put it out there so people can suggest improvements or build on it. We're excited about the potential for the tool, but the gaps remain large, as we all know. And one of the things we'll be advocating for out of our project, and we hope you'll support us in, is advocating that particularly governmental entities spend more time and attention creating valuable data that can inform themselves and their decision making and give us more accurate and timely research finding. If we can draw more attention to these issues through these efforts and seminars like this, we'll be very happy with our progress. Today, we have a great panel of folks who represent the different stakeholders that we call out in our research. We have Andy Navarrete, who's the head of external relations to Capital One, who has been supporting some of our research. Angie Kamath from the NYU School, New York University School of Professional Studies, and my colleague and co-founder of this project I work for is David Deming from our Kennedy School, who will be discussing the research we've done and research we intend to do. Leila O'Kane, who I've collaborated with on several projects in the past, who is the research director and senior economist at Lightcast, which many of you will still think of as Burning Glass, will bring her data expertise and their perspective as partners in our work. We're also joined by Goldie Blumenstick from the Chronicle. She needs no introduction to anyone in this audience, I'm sure, who's going to be our moderator. Before we jump into the discussion, though, let me introduce Chike Agu from the Department of Labor, who's going to share his perspective on federal policy as a leader who's trying to drive change in the field.
Joe, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you, David, the Project on Workforce, and all the folks who are on this call who I know are working on these really important issues. You heard Joe talk about the what, and you're going to hear, I think, our panelists talk about the how. I think what I want to do is zoom out and talk about the why. For those of you who I've not gotten to meet, my name is Chike Agu, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer here at the U.S. Department of Labor, working with Julie Su, our acting secretary. And when I think about the why of this work and why it is so important, I'm going to name out a couple of reasons why, and why I want to be on this call even for just a short period of time. One, if we're going to think about how we leverage our higher education system in America to push economic opportunity, we have to burrow in and really talk about the equity impacts of that. If we look at the pandemic, whether it be from a workforce side or from a higher education completion student success side, we know that populations of color, Black and brown folk, immigrants, women, people from rural and poor communities have never gotten as much out of that economy or out of that system as we would like. And so having this work put the rigor and bring the partnerships together to really look at how we can move that forward is critical. If my boss, Julie Stewart, here, she would talk about when we say all, we should mean all. And that's why this work is so important, because it can begin to give us the rigor and point out the path for how we make that so. I think secondly, as we think about the economic competitiveness of this country, and particularly the industrial policy of this country with the once-in-a-generation investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, we must use our higher education system to be an engine of talent to make sure that we have the workers of today to build the things of tomorrow. Right now, I can tell you from the companies that I talk to who are in all of these spaces, the road between here and there is not clear. And the power of this work is hopefully being able to make that road a little clearer so that we have the workers that we need to build the things that are going to make, hopefully, extend that American century from the 20th into the 21st. I think thirdly, we went through one huge economic disruption, being the pandemic. And I want to put it in perspective. I started this job January 20th, 2021. In that week, 3.3 million people filed new unemployment insurance claims, which is 5x the historic record. And by the way, they had been doing that for almost a year. The highest week of unemployment was May of 2020, which I believe was about 6.6 million claims, new claims. And when you think about how those people got back to work, many of them went to their local community college. They went to their local HBCU. They went to their local four-year institution. And we must think of higher education not simply at what it is, which is a center of knowledge, but also as a critical a piece of the economic engine. And we have to make sure that they have the tools and that we have the tools to make sure that people can get back to work, particularly in a time of economic disruption. As painful as that recession was, it likely will not be our last. And not now and in the future, we have to make sure that we are ready and we are prepared. Let me say the last piece for why this is important, and this is going to vary for me, very personal. For those of you who know me, my family is a very classic immigrant story to this country. My family comes from a village in Nigeria that most Nigerians themselves will never go to and never visit. And none of my grandparents went past middle school. My parents had Peace Corps volunteers in their classrooms, and the streets they grew up on were unpaved then and were unpaved now. And today, I'm the first person in my entire family born in America, and I'm sitting with you all as an appointee of an American president. That happened because my folks got golden tickets to come to the United States of America and study at American public universities. That is what changed the course of our family. And the question is, how do we make the story that I just told you more possible for more people? And the only way to do that is to do what this project, these tools are looking to do, which is connect higher education more fully, more robustly, more rigorously to the American economy, and make sure that there's a bridge between the two, so that people like my parents can do for their families what America was able to do for me. So I am so honored to be here. I'm so excited about this work, and we see it as a critical piece of winning this next decade and hopefully winning this next century. To the Project on Workforce, I turn it back to you, and thank you again for the time and for all the work.
Hello, everybody. I guess this is the handoff we're having here. Hi, everybody. I'm Goldie Blumenstick. I'm a senior writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education, where I write the biweekly newsletter called The Edge about innovation in and around higher education. Glad to have you all here. A lot of the topics we cover in The Edge concern these very topics about the sometimes awkward transition from college to career. So I'm very honored to be invited to be the moderator for today's panel. I'm really thrilled to have with us David Deming, who one of the co-authors of the College-to-Jobs Playbook, which we'll be talking about today, Andy from Capital One, Angie from NYU, and Layla from Lightcast, the organization formerly known as MZ Burning Glass. And Prince. I see a lot of people are using the Q&A, thanks, using the chat, so be to communicate, that's cool, but continue to think about questions that you want to pose for me or the other panelists, and I'll forward them to the panelists. Use the Q&A for that, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So look forward to this conversation going ahead here. I want to start right from the start here. This report looked at 13 different interventions and kind of evaluated them a little bit, and they highlight some very big challenges, both for the research community, for policymakers, for colleges, and for employers themselves. And we're going to get to that some of those questions in a minute. But first, I wanted to go back just for a minute or two and talk about this new data tool that's been created, the College-to-Jobs Map. It's sort of an unusual research tool that people can use in this case. So I wanted to make sure we all understood a little bit about how that worked. It's sort of designed for use by economic development folks, educators, policymakers, and also for employers. So I thought maybe we'd just start with maybe with David and Angie just from the get-go here. For Layla, since you were sort of key in creating this thing, how would someone from the economic development community, or maybe even someone from the policymaker side, how would you suggest that they take this data tool and use it to make a difference?
Thanks, Goldie. Maybe I can jump in and just kind of give a broad brush overview, and Layla can jump in with the specifics. So first of all, thanks everybody for the opportunity to be here. This is a labor of love. This is a real team effort. While Joe and I are the figureheads, there's a huge team of folks behind us, not only having worked on the College-to-Jobs map, but also working here to make everything run smoothly. So I want to thank everybody for all the work that y'all put in. I want to thank Capital One and our other funders for helping us, and of course, our partners. So here's why I'm really excited about the College to Jobs map. I don't think of it as giving anybody an answer to anything. I think about it as a tool to help folks all across the country ask the right questions about how do we create better and smoother pathways between education and training institutions and the labor market. And so I could go through with you a number of examples about how to use the tool to garner specific insights about specific areas. But the number one thing I want to emphasize is that you should go to this tool today and you should look up the area that you live in or work, and you should start asking questions. Like, what are the jobs that are highly in demand in my area? That's the demand side. So what do employers want? And then what are the degrees and certificates and other programs that are being offered by local institutions? And is there a mismatch between those? Is there an opportunity, let's say, to invest more in healthcare jobs? For just a common example, because every town in America almost has a hospital or a medical center, and the education and training institutions are not always in those places. And so you often see that as a mismatch. It's also a huge growth area for the economy. There's some places where advanced manufacturing is in high demand, but really it's just like America, it's a kaleidoscope of different options. And so what we wanted to do is not say, here's the answer, you should do this. Every area should invest in healthcare jobs or anything else. It's really a way to start asking the questions. And rather than going to your local community members and stakeholders and just saying, well, so-and-so told me that, we might need to invest more in jobs or whatever, you can actually have data information right at your fingertips. And the last thing I'll say is that one of the reasons we decided to do this was, I'm an academic, and I spend a lot of time writing at a high level about these issues, like how do we create better pathways, using insights from research. But I found myself being at the Kennedy School of Government, talking with policymakers, getting asked questions about, well, how can I do this in my area? I'm a mayor and I want to invest in better jobs or, whatever. And I found myself often just actually looking this data up for people. And, because I'm a data geek, it's easy for me to do that, but it's not easy for other people to do it. And so I think about this as basically just a way to smooth that transaction so that we can scale up these insights, because really everybody needs them. And you can only answer so many questions. So just want to encourage everyone to go and play around with the tool and to see what kind of opportunities it provides. I think it's really powerful, and I'm just really happy that we got this out there to the public for all of you to use. So thanks, Layla. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, David. I want to echo your thoughts. I think it's a great idea for everybody to actually use the tool, because that will make some of this a little bit more concrete. But I think I want to also take a step back and just kind of frame the problem that this tool is sort of helping to support solving. So, the value of a college degree is kind of in question, and maybe it's been decreasing. And I think there's a lot of questions about, well, what can we do to connect better folks who have certain levels of education to good jobs? And this tool allows you to see in specific regions, where are there maybe an oversupply or an undersupply of certain majors or jobs that are not connecting well to the sort of demand side of the market. I think one of the really exciting things is this is a local issue, but it's also a national issue, right? So maybe you're seeing that in my local area, I don't have enough healthcare graduates and I need more healthcare workers. And that might be true for many different areas across the US. And so this allows you to sort of build a coalition of folks who are saying, hey, here's what I'm trying to sort of build out this healthcare pipeline. What are you trying? And so, different regions can kind of connect to each other and say, look, it looks like based on the data, we have kind of similar challenges or similar problems. Maybe we can connect to each other and understand some of that solution space and sort of create that coalition building. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity for people to understand their region, but also kind of bring that up to a national level and say, hey, how can I work to solve this with other people?
And I can appreciate the value of that information. Also want to calibrate this conversation a little bit, because obviously, we're still going to need a lot of healthcare workers, I think, for the rest of our days. But a lot of other industries, the needs change pretty quickly, and they might change more quickly than colleges. I'm not trying to bash colleges, but colleges shouldn't necessarily go willy-nilly adopting programs, changing programs all along so quickly. So I wonder, is there some risks in having this data tool and then people saying, well, we need this, then colleges go spend 2 years creating a new program, and then 2 years later that they don't need that need anymore. Does this have the opportunity to kind of, ping pong ball universities a little bit? David,
I appreciate the question, Goldie, but I don't think so. And the reason is that I think that everybody understands that the data are a starting point and not an end point for a conversation. I don't think anybody on this webinar or elsewhere in the country would irresponsibly use the information to tell colleges to ping pong. I think about it as just a diagnostic to get our foot in the door. And let me just say one thing quickly about the data. It's incredibly comprehensive on both sides. So this is not some convenient survey sample where people don't always respond. This is on the college side. This is the universe of colleges that give out Title IV funding. So in order to disperse Pell Grants and Stafford loans, you have to respond to this survey administered by the Department of Education. So it's a very complete coverage of colleges with any size that basically give out federal money. So it's got everything. And then on the demand side, Lightcast has been collecting this data in a systematic way for years all across the country, in a really comprehensive way. So I just want to emphasize the quality of the data. It really is going to give you a real-time snapshot on the demand side. And then on the supply side, as you said, Goldie, with colleges, I don't think it means that they need to automatically match. Like it's not, there's a lot of things going on. There's obviously some slippage between the degrees people get and the jobs they take. So again, it shouldn't be absolute, but as a way to compare your area to others, to see, are there common problems everyone's facing, as Layla mentioned, or is it something unique to our region? It just speeds up, I think, the research and development process for generating insights about how we can, improve economic development in any particular area.
And then just one more quick question on that. I know the data covers a period from 2014 to 2019. We've had some cataclysmic changes to our economy since 2019, and I'm just wondering, from the trajectory point of view, is this data still good on a trajectory basis, or have some things radically changed along the way that makes us also give another second look to the data tool and, second guess a little bit some of what the information is?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I mean, I think that actually speaks a little bit to the question you asked before, which is I'm not sure we want to. I mean, we will update it obviously when the data come through, but we also don't want to be captive to the moment too much. So I don't know if we want it to emphasize the real-time nature as much as looking at longer run trends. I think I'd be more confident if you showed me that over a 5-year period, a certain area had a mismatch between supply than if you just told me right now, because who knows what's going on, et cetera. So I actually think of that as more of a virtue.
Okay, it's a feature, not a bug. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Great. Great. Let's turn to the College-to-Jobs Playbook, which I found really fascinating. I'm writing about it a little bit in my newsletter this week as well. I'm going to bring in Andy and Angie here for this conversation a little bit. The research looked at a lot of different interventions. Looked at 13 of them, identified them a little more specifically. Interestingly enough, it found that internships was one of the interventions where there seemed to be a great deal of evidence about effectiveness, and also just the depth of the information was great. But even for internships, it found some really I guess disturbing inequities, particularly in the area of who gets internships, who gets unpaid internships, and who gets paid internships. It said that some of that research turned up that Black students are far more likely to get unpaid internships than their white or other peers. So let's start with you, Andy, here. Since you represent a company and an employer, you're now representing all employers of all of America here. Good luck with that.
Not at all.
Yeah, no pressure. But I'm just wondering, from a corporate perspective, what can companies do to kind of fix some of these inequities, particularly in areas like internships, but also in some of the other, job shadowing, mentoring, some of the other programs. But since the evidence is quite clear for internships, what kinds of things can companies, employers do to, and more intentionally make sure those opportunities are more available, particularly for an intervention that's been found to be especially effective?
No, and thank you, Goldie. And I think after this session, you'll get a sense of why Capital One, whose entire heritage is rooted in data and analytics, was so excited to be part of this effort. I just think the playbook and the lessons learned and the platform that we're building to really better understand these issues going forward is just going to be transformational. So maybe start with a little bit of a history lesson within Capital One. So workforce development has been one of the pillars of our impact initiative since its inception. And so this has always been an area where we're looking to grow the pool of available talent to meet all of our hiring needs, especially in the tech space, which is, in addition to healthcare, another really strongly growing field. One of the things that we did was partner with a number of organizations like Year Up and Perscolis that were focused on opportunity youth. And so these are individuals typically 18 to 24, oftentimes from communities of color, oftentimes first-gen individuals that had perhaps gotten off the traditional 4-year college track. And so we focused on paid internships, which was an outstanding program, filling tech jobs. And the program overall, I think, was successful in sourcing talent. But one of the things that was sort of an underlying philosophy going on was no special treatment, right? We wanted to make sure that these individuals didn't feel othered, and therefore we didn't really build much of an infrastructure or programming around them once they entered the doors of Capital One. Well, in many respects, what we learned was that's actually antithetical to how we did college recruiting. So we hire a number of college interns every single year, try to make that as diverse as possible. But we put these individuals through rigorous training, all sorts of interventions, all sorts of soft skills training and hard skills training or whatever. There's mentorships and convenings. They very much operate like a cohort, and it's a 2-year program with formal rotations. There is so much infrastructure and scaffolding built around these individuals that their likelihood of success once they hit corporate America is actually greatly elevated. And so I think there's a parallel here, which is, there was a great point by one of our listeners about this not being an or exercise, it's an and or exercise. So we at Capital One learned that these interventions, the scaffolding, the infrastructure are essential, not just the access to the job. I would think that we ought to be looking at college in the same way. So much focus, I think, for communities of color in particular, has been on college access rather than college persistence and then college value. And so if we look at these interventions as opportunities to develop these students in a way that doesn't actually constitute special treatment for the gaining of advantage, but rather constitutes just leveling the playing field, I think you will find or whatever that the entire ecosystem will operate in a much stronger way. And so that's why I think we're really, really excited to be part of this effort, because this completion of the ecosystem and the recognition of all these interventions actually operating in concert is something that we actually think is perhaps the secret sauce to solving some of these issues going forward.
Right. So in effect, put a lot more intentionality behind not just your cohort of people that you might be hiring, but your pipeline of people through the internships and the like.
Yeah, I mean, the way we look at it is special treatment is leveling the playing field in this instance. It's not actually trying to gain unfair advantage. I think that's something that, the way that folks talk about these issues and these interventions, we have to change the vocabulary and the lens to recognize that that's what we're trying to achieve.
So Angie, I know as Andy mentioned Perscolas, I know you worked with them previously when you were at CUNY, but from the college's perspective, what can institutions do, maybe short of money, because obviously money always helps, but colleges don't always have the budgets for supporting students with internships, but what could colleges do to make particularly internships and also some of these other interventions a little bit more available to students who first generation students who don't have the networks, don't have all the other ways to, easily connect to these kinds of opportunities that make a difference?
Sure. Thanks, Goldie. And thank you so much to the Project on Workforce at Harvard and everyone involved. So a couple of things. And I come from an interesting place where I worked at Perscolas. I worked at CUNY, the nation's largest urban public, now I'm at NYU, the nation's largest R1. And so it's interesting how similar all of the issues are across kind of all those populations. I think often we can sort of sit here and, start to kind of nitpick and kind of parse out the difference between a community-based organization versus kind of an R1. And I see the issues very similar. And I very much agree with Andy that this is a multivariable problem. And so it's multivariable solutions are required, right? And so we have to put a lot on the table. And I think I'd say a couple of things that I'd want to say. I think internships, I actually like to think of it as more part-time work. And I think the problem that we're trying to solve for here is experience, social capital building, and some level of financial remuneration. And if we think about those things as the problems that we're trying to solve, the reason why I reframe it that way is that, well, we know all the trends, and Goldie, you've written so much about this. I mean, the biggest growing segment of learners are non-traditional, quote unquote. The majority of learners out there are not folks who come straight through as an 18-year-old entering college. They're folks who are working and learning. They're folks who have gaps in their educational experience. And so the notion often of putting kind of an experienced learner who's kind of working and learning in an internship is kind of, itself, something that we have to, I think, reframe. So again, I say the problem is experience building, social capital building, and kind of financial remuneration. And so, what are some of the pieces that I saw at CUNY that I still sort of see here at NYU and that I certainly saw at Perscolas? I think that making sure that it's a really rational choice for someone who has a very consistent part-time job to take an 8-week paid internship is actually not all that rational of a choice, because at the end of 8 weeks, maybe you get a job, maybe you don't, but you don't have that very consistent part-time job to kind of fall back on. And so what I often saw in a lot of my experiences were that internships, served a very flexible segment of learner, but not the majority of learners. And so, I mean, a couple of things that I think are really important are thinking about the flexibility. So longer term kind of residency, sort of rotational programs like Andy described, I think are really important. The idea of, not having kind of an 8-week internship be the be all and end all, because it simply doesn't work for folks who need a consistent income and a reliable income. And so thinking about kind of year-long part-time work, for example, at Breakthrough Tech, something that was founded and piloted at CUNY and then kind of taken on and scaled nationally by Pivotal Ventures, a very short stint called a Winternship, a 2 to 3 week experience building, social capital building experience that was paid, actually made a huge difference in the ability for those folks. And this was something that people would take advantage of in their freshman year. And the ability for that person, and again, some research that really supported the folks, the idea of doing a short-term kind of low stakes internship over a 3-week period, something like 80% of folks actually landed freshman year a solid paid IT internship, which was sort of unimaginable for someone coming out of kind of a freshman year.
Who funded that? Was that from the suppliers of the internship, of the Winternships, or the institution?
Yes, the companies, and they were more than happy to pay for that. And again, a $1,500, $1,000 investment for social capital building experience, and really it was a recruitment and awareness building tool for diverse hiring in IT. Great example. So those are 3 ideas: residencies with rotations, year-long kind of part-time work, or internships. I think are 3 ways that I saw, I think with evidence, the ability to kind of grab a different worker and solve the problem of experience, social capital, and kind of financial reward. And I just think that we have to look at different ways. And I saw some good points in the chat, just calling it what we call it matters, and kind of how we think about this, because a lot of companies have very successful internship programs that are their pipeline for entry-level work. It's not broken, it's just not diverse. And so I think we have to add to it rather than trying to dismantle something that many employers view as a workable solution for one segment, and add in a lot more opportunity and options.
It was interesting that you mentioned also the value of the part-time job that the student already has. I know there's organizations, I believe College Unbound is one of them, that they basically take the job and they put the educational layer on top of the student's existing job. Maybe you or David could talk a little bit about how might that work, really add, make it the job plus with the educational layer on top. Is that a feasible kind of approach for colleges to take?
For sure. I mean, there are lots of programs that essentially do that. You might spend 4 days a week on the job and then 1 day in a kind of seminar style class where you synthesize what you've learned on the job, talk with your peers who have different internships. There's a lot of things like that are happening in four-year colleges, community colleges, other institutions right now. And I think part of it is just, I think we need to stop thinking about this as an add-on to the traditional program structure and start to think about it as integrated as part of it.
Right.
So, and I the way I think about it is maybe too simple, but I think has the ring of truth, which is like, if you want to learn how to build job skills, you need to work in jobs that, like, the best training is the thing that most closely approximates the thing you want to do. And so there's just a lot of implicit learning that happens on the job. The interesting thing, Goldie, about a lot of the evidence on internships that really changed my beliefs, what I thought it was, I thought that the main reason internships help is because they give you a connection to a particular employer. But actually, a lot of the studies that we cited in the playbook don't show that. It's, government programs where you got an internship somewhere and either your first job was not with the same employer, or actually in some cases they were prohibited from hiring you in the internship. So, and still people had huge employment and earnings effects. So it shows there's really something about work-based learning that's not just a connection to an employer. It's something deeper than that. And that's the thing that I think makes me feel like this has to be really a part of almost every educational experience going forward.
I was
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Real quickly, just from an education perspective, and Andy, I think the employer perspective is so important here. I mean, certainly internships, and again, multivariable solutions to multivariable problems, work-based learning has to absolutely be sort of that next revolution in higher ed. I know a lot of places have taken it on, but I think we have to sort of really, figure out the recognition for learning in places other than classrooms. I think we really have to build it in and integrate it. And again, work-based learning can show up in lots of different ways, in the same way that part-time work work can show up in lots of different ways, not just internships, right? So whether it's co-ops, apprenticeships, whether it's just an internship or work experience or hours required for graduation, whether it's full-time classes, whether it's really internalizing portfolio and recognition for prior learning or other learning. There are a lot of techniques that folks can use, but I think this has to be part of this kind of revolution of reframing the problem, not just as internships for all, but kind of work experience and that social capital building as well. Sorry, Andy.
No. Look, I was just going to add, there's a lot of passion on this topic. Like at Capital One, we don't do unpaid internships. They're all paid, like the entry level positions that these individuals will be hired into. One of the things, I came from a very stereotypical DC environment. My first internship was unpaid on Capitol Hill. And working for free was like a badge of honor. And that's just a mindset that we have to get out of. The fact is, working for free is a privilege. And it's incredibly exclusionary when you think about the opportunities that are then made available to those who are able to afford to do that. And so, from the employer perspective, we ought to be out of the, free internship or unpaid internship business. I think government entities, others who offer these kinds of programs ought to be thinking the same way. But then colleges and others can think about creative ways to offer stipends and other kinds of remuneration in order to allow these individuals to make these choices. So again, this is something that's an and solution where the ecosystem has to work in concert.
Go ahead, Lily.
I just want to add, because I agree with what my colleagues have said. And I also just want to add that there are a couple places that I think we see colleges doing this really successfully, but maybe we just don't translate that into the four-year institutions. So at associate degree levels, almost all of them require hands-on work experience. And in order to get that degree, you basically have to go and do some work. And there are co-op opportunities that happen at four-year institutions, but that's a relatively sort of rare phenomenon right now. I know I'll put my employer hat on for a second, we hire a lot of co-ops from Northeastern University in Boston, and that's a great pipeline for us and a partnership that we've developed over many years with that education institution. And they come in for 6 months, they work full-time for 6 months, they get a lot of experience, and we have a really robust pipeline of talent that we've built through that partnership. And so as an employer, we love that because we know it's reliable and we know that the students have other work experience often. And so they're not necessarily coming to us for their first time. And so it's a great opportunity. And I think there are a lot of places that are doing this already. It's just not necessarily making its way across the whole ecosystem. So I really agree that it's a win-win for both sides if we can kind of expand that.
One of the things that, by the way, that if you're not looking at the chat, check it out because it's very robust, as we would say. People are cheering, people are adding in their comments, everyone's getting kudos. It's really kind of fun. One of the things that really struck me when I was reading through the report was, even though David, you and your colleagues were able to look at a lot of evidence, wasn't that much evidence. I mean, I think I looked at like 530 studies. I would have thought there would have been a lot more than that, honestly, myself, given the way that this topic seems to be so important in the country. So I guess I'm wondering, what are the prospects for getting better research, particularly on some of these emerging, micro internships, virtual job shadowing, what's a couple other ones, embedding in industry credentials into degrees. These are all things that I've written about in the Edge. I'm hearing about a lot of campuses, but maybe there's not enough evidence about them right now to show whether they're actually working. What are some of the policy levers that we need to be pulling here? And anybody can answer this question about to get better evidence, and even if it's not a 3-year randomized controlled trial, but get evidence out there that actually would be legit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you asked that question, Goldie, because part of the value, in my view, of writing something like the College-to-Jobs Playbook is to show all of the things we don't know, but need to know to make good decisions. And, I always, it's like the joke that academics will always say more research is needed. And maybe it's always true, maybe it's not. It's definitely true in this case. I think we have a lot of examples of specific success cases in specific areas. So this program worked at this college with this set of employers, but not a lot of generalized knowledge about what types of things might work for somebody who's thinking about starting a program, a lot of kind of special case studies and not a lot of systematic evidence. And part of it is we don't have a lot of systematic information. So the map, the map and some other things we're doing at the Project and Workforce are trying to systematically collect information about what's happening out there and to try to, as just a first step, toward understanding what works and evaluating it. So I do think the future is very bright because there's so much attention paid to this area that I think you're going to see more research and more studies of these things. And again, research, I don't necessarily mean just publishing in academic journals, although that's certainly important, but also research with partners like Lightcast, like Capital One, like NYU and others. You know, we're always looking for partners to work on these things, and we're happy if any of you in the webinar, you know, want your program to be evaluated or want to know what the evidence is or want to add to the evidence base, we're happy to discuss that with you. That's really what we do. We view that as our value added to this space at Harvard, at the Project and Workforce, being a multi-sector organization. You know, we're trying to be a clearinghouse for what works in this really important space.
Yeah. So Andy and Layla in particular, are there some different kinds of incentives that would help? I mean, Layla, you speak with a lot of, you probably deal with a lot of employers that would help employers incentivize them to get a little more connected to these kinds of studies. And obviously there's other kinds of studies that need to be done that follow students into their work lives. And that's not necessarily an employer challenge. That might be a government policy challenge to be able to get some of that data. But what kinds of things would incentivize employers to get more engaged with this?
I mean, I think the silver lining maybe of the labor shortage problem that we've been facing for a few years now, and that I think we will continue to face in some areas, is that employers are highly incentivized to expand the talent pool. You know, they're really looking for people, and they need to understand how to get the right people in their employment, whether that's through some reskilling opportunities or upskilling opportunities that they help participate in, whether that's through partnering with colleges to create majors that align really well with the skill needs that they have. And so I think the incentives are now aligned, you know, for better, for worse. And I think it's a question of sort of creating that forum for employers to say, this is what I've tried. What have you tried? You know, where are you going to get this talent? And I think one of the things is employers don't talk a lot to each other about the ways in which they're trying to expand their talent pool, because in some ways that's sort of a competitive thing, right? If I'm looking for welders and so are you, then, you know, maybe I want to sort of keep it to myself how I'm finding those successful candidates. Right. And so I think creating sort of an understanding and a coalition of people that say, hey, we all need welders because we need to be able to sort of support this environment that we're now living in. How can we partner with a community college to make sure that the American Welding Society certificate is offered there, and that industry credential is something that I recognize and I can, you know, include that. I think the other thing I want to say on the research side also is there are some new sources of data that I think are sort of unexplored that can help us understand some of these issues. So at Lightcast, we have some data on social profiles. So basically individuals' worker profiles over the course of their career. And that can include things like where they went to college, if they did, if they didn't, what are their job prospects, you know, if they did an internship, if they have a credential. And a colleague of mine recently did a study using this data to look specifically at adult learners and non-traditional learners to see some of the career outcomes of essentially working for a time period, not going to college maybe right away at the age of 18, but working maybe part-time, interspersing that with some education and then going back to work full time, and what are the outcomes. And we saw great upward mobility rates for adult learners, which is not surprising, but was comforting to see that there is data that kind of supports this. And so I think there are these sort of non-traditional data sources that we are now gaining access to that can offer a lot of insight into these areas without having to go to sort of an experimental randomized control trial situation.
Yeah, Goldie, I'll build on Layla's point in a massive +1 to the idea that the incentives already exist. The fact is,
honestly, though, there are incentives for there are incentives that are all about what the employer needs, but they're not necessarily incentives that would help evaluate what's ultimately best for the student or the graduate. I mean, they might be aligned, but they're not necessarily always aligned.
No. Look, I agree with that, and so let me I'll make the broader point that the incentives are there. The fact is that we're in a war for talent, and we're honestly scouring the globe, especially for highly in-demand skills like tech and others. And so anything that could literally advance the development of these skills domestically would be a huge boon. But the other thing is on the research side, to David's point, the incentives exist there as well. I mean, research isn't just for academia. We have the Capital One Insight Center, which actually does research, works with a number of academic institutions, nonprofit institutions, all to sort of see what programs are most effective, what interventions are likely to lead to better outcomes. And so that incentive exists as well. But one thing I will say is that we also have access to incredibly rich pools of data. And so I know in the chat, there was a lot of concerns about, where do you actually find this information? The fact is Capital One hires over 1,000 interns every single year. And so if you want to study longitudinally the success of those individuals and what made them successful, I think we could provide a good N for that kind of study. But I think other large employers would be another great place to start. And then we could hopefully get to the point where we could actually build sufficient scale to then drive that down into smaller and smaller employers, because they're critical to the picture as well.
There's also in New York, there's the CEO Jobs Council was started 2 years ago or 3 years ago, excuse me, in the middle of the pandemic to hit a goal of 100,000 hires within the kind of 30 and growing member companies based in New York, with a real focus on low income. And so again, they defined sort of, really looking at the research. And so within that, the 30 companies have different hiring practices, which can make research hard, but there's going to be a lot of data in terms of what works. And so there's micro-credential strategies, there's hiring strategies, there's associate degree hiring and kind of, relooking at job description strategies. And I think that it'll be really interesting to be able to work with consortia of employers who, like Andy and Capital One, are interested and willing to kind of learn from this and to kind of pool some of that data, but also disaggregate it by approach. And I think that that's going to be very important. So it's not just the singular case study of what one company does, but I think being able to do the compare and contrast. I know there are many other employer consortiums like 110 and others kind of throughout the country. And I think it's going to be really important to start to look at how employers perform in kind of more aggregated types of ways.
One thing I was wondering, bringing this back to sort of the level of where the colleges are operating right now, one thing that really struck me about this report is it pointed out that in many cases, when employers are trying to make better connections with colleges, they don't necessarily know where to go if the career center is not maybe quite visible to them. It reminded me a little bit of what I used to hear from when I covered tech transfer and companies looking for a corporate spot, for sponsorship and research connections. They didn't quite know where to go. So, but at the same time, this report makes it really clear that this can't just be the job of the career center. In fact, it sort of suggests blow up the career center and make this job one for everybody at the campus. But how do you sort of reconcile these two things, David, and maybe others, and just even as a challenge for colleges, you're kind of asking colleges to do all things. Create a central point for people to be connected. Make sure faculty members and everybody else who works at the college sees that this is part of their job. And be clear to employers about where they could be connecting with if they want to be. Seems like it's a big drain on colleges' resources. And how much are you dumping on with this report, are you dumping a lot on the colleges, particularly places that don't have, the wherewithal to kind of fund these kind of efforts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're talking about a culture change for many institutions, not all of them. Some of them have already done it. But I think it's important to at least start to move in that direction, and then to think about, models that would provide more public funding for this type of thing. So I don't have the illusion that this could all happen overnight, or that it could happen solely by redirecting initial resources. That being said, I think it's important to take seriously. And my favorite reason is that, we can decide as, I work at a prestigious university, I can decide what I think people want. But if you actually ask people in the world, what do they want out of their education? This is what they say they want. So it's sort of anti-democratic to continue to run a university in a way that we think, everyone should study classical liberal arts and sciences. And if that's not what students say they want, particularly at our public institutions, which are taxpayer funded, I think we sort of have an obligation to give people what they say they want with their own tax dollars. And so it probably is expensive to, I know it's expensive because we try to do work-based learning here at the Kennedy School, and it's a coordination problem. So it's not just expensive in terms of money, it's also, and kind of funding the internships, it's also a lot of building of connective tissue between colleges and employers and so on. But it's the thing, in my view, that is going to get higher ed over the hump and maintain the US's kind of global lead in higher education, maintain our ability to keep our economy as dynamic as it has been in the past, and to counteract some of the negative public sentiment about higher ed. I think people have a very real sense, and it's, I think, fair in a lot of cases, that colleges are not doing as good of a job as they could to meet the needs of student learners in today's economy. And so I just think we have to start pushing toward it. And that's kind of why that's a good reason for our existence and a good reason to keep working on it. Although I think, Goldie, you're right. It's not really fair to expect the college as it is currently constituted to kind of do all of this overnight and pretend that it's going to be easy or anything. I think about it as a public conversation and a public investment.
Angie, any thoughts?
Yeah, and so it's interesting, and I feel like I'm about to step in the hornet's nest, so spoiler alert, but within, when I worked in public higher ed, I think we estimated about 30% of students got served very well by career services. 70% didn't. And so that in my mind makes the case for work-based learning. We have to just have a bigger team. The answer is not a bigger career services. It's expanding the tent of where we can get those work-based kind of experience building and kind of social capital building connections, which is in the classroom, and those work-based projects, whether it's consulting projects, capstones, practicums, whatever, that's really important. And that's kind of how we can widen the number of touch points that students can have. At my school, and this is the hornet's nest comment, I don't have any tenure track faculty. I have for 5,000 degree seeking students, I have 1,000 industry adjuncts who teach for us part-time, and we have a 95% employment rate within 6 months of graduation, because quite frankly, so many of our adjuncts are hiring our students directly. And what's interesting is that even in public higher ed, I think 60-70% of the teaching force is adjuncts. And so it's really interesting. Like I feel like we're so close to understanding how do we get more of these kind of connections of experience and social capital building. I really think an adjunct workforce that is paid fairly, that's kind of absolutely recruited appropriately with industry engagement and a foot in the academy and a foot in industry is a really big asset that so many public and private schools have. We happen to have it in spades here, and I think it actually speaks a lot to our success around jobs. But I think that most publics also have kind of upwards of 70% of their workforce comes in the form of adjunct ranks. So I think that there's a really interesting way to think about that in terms of all the assets that can help a student gain the necessary skills and experience.
Right. Well, yeah, there are adjuncts and there are adjuncts, though. Some are adjuncts because they can't get hired as full-time. Some are professionals who are just doing this as a little part-time gig. It's important to distinguish that even among the 70%. Mm-hmm. But this conversation has taken me back to a thing that I've been starting to think a lot about. And here's a question for kind of all of you. Are we framing this question all wrong? This is a relatively new question, but have we framed it the wrong way? Should it be more holistic? Should it be more about what should students, how should colleges be preparing students for civics, for roles in civil society, for roles for productive careers and everything else, rather than just like helping students with their careers? Because the career thing, frankly, sounds a little reductive and a little maybe off-putting to some people at colleges. Is this just a semantics thing, or is there something there about changing the nature of this conversation? I'm going to start with Andy, if you think about it. I'm going to kind of go around the horn here.
Yeah, Goldie, it's a hilarious question to ask 53 minutes into a 60-minute session. But look, I
never too late, by the way, to get it right. Yeah.
I don't think we're framing it incorrectly, but I try not to be too literal in how I sort of think about problems. And so we're talking in the context of what colleges can do to help, again, this ecosystem thrive. There was a great point in the chat about, are we still saying college is the solution? No, I don't think college is the solution for everybody. It's still, true in America that the workforce has probably 35% of people have college degrees. And so there's, we can't afford to ignore 65% of the available talent pool. And so my thought is that all of the research here, all of the interventions, all of the things that we're talking about in terms of what makes an internship successful, what skills people need in order to be able to thrive in the workplace, I think that's applicable across the board, whether you're talking about traditional 4-year, whether you're talking about 2-year and associate's degrees, whether you're talking about workforce development programs, or even people coming straight out of high school. Like, we ought to apply these learnings across the board.
Anyone else? Would a different, is it just semantics, or would a different framing make a difference?
Well, I'll jump in a little bit, Goldie. I guess
you started there. You kind of got close to that anyway. So
I did. Yeah. So I know there's this kind of like, should we be focused on careers, or should we be focused on preparing citizens and kind of like more theoretical arts and sciences? I kind of just think that's a false choice. I think that what we want is higher educational institutions are places where learning happens. And guess what? Learning doesn't just happen in a classroom. It happens on the job too. And so to the extent that people are placed in situations where they can learn in an applied way on the job, if that helps them on their journey, then that's part of the mission of the college. Obviously we're not talking about giving people make work internships where they learn nothing or they're in dead in jobs or whatever. But if we're actually thinking about it as an intentional learning opportunity, then I find it to be totally consistent with the mission of colleges. And I think I would juxtapose it with sitting in a classroom where neither the instructor nor the student is especially engaged, and where everyone kind of views it as a means to an end. And, and not everybody does that, but I know a lot of students do. And so I think trying to change that, it's not like the status quo is perfect. So I guess I try to focus on the goal being learning and helping people on their journey in life, of which careers are a big part. And therefore, I don't know if we're framing this conversation wrong, but I think the work we're all doing here on this panel is absolutely the right work. Of course, I think that because I'm here, but I do really believe it.
I think, Goldie, I'll just add that maybe one of the things that people can sometimes be frustrated with is there's a lot of focus on maybe technical skills or very narrow career paths and saying, well, you're not preparing students for this idea of career that I have in my mind. And I think that's not what we're trying to say or what this work is trying to say. I think there's a lot of value from the sort of critical thinking and communication and skills that you get from a liberal arts education still have a lot of value in the workplace, even if you can't say this is a one-to-one match, like I'm taking a course on critical thinking and now I do critical thinking. You're getting that from that learning experience throughout. And I think employers recognize that and they still see the value in some of those things. It's just bringing those two sides together a little bit more frequently and trying to understand, how do we tie in these skills with some hard skills, with some career learning, with some workplace placements to sort of be the whole package.
What I was thinking about, Layla, I guess back when when Lightcast was burning glass, I think about that 14 skill wheel where
the new foundational skills. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And where it's the human skills, the business skills or business enabling skills.
Yep.
And the technical and tech enabled skills. And I think, Goldie, to answer, to think about your question, how do we create experiences that help build all three of those skill types in terms of human, business enabling, and kind of tech enabling? And again, it's a totally different path at 58 minutes into a 60-minute conversation. But when I think about how do we solve for experiences that give people that, I go back to the notion of gap years or a national year of service, where we can kind of think about how we could at scale deliver career exploration, paid work, experience building, and kind of really learning by doing in a big way. And I feel like those are some of the bold, I think, moves that we need to think about policy-wise, in addition to the research, in addition to kind of helping employers kind of get their talent needs taken, in addition to kind of invigorating kind of work-based learning within higher ed institutions. But I really, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that national service and gap years was a good idea, I think would be rich. But I'm not going to give it up, because I actually think it's a really important way to think about a dimension of this problem at scale.
Okay, great. We're getting close to when we have to shut down here. There's a lot of questions in the chat that sort of got covered in the conversation and in the Q&A. One quick question from the Q&A that struck me was, there's a lot more emphasis on, virtual mentorships, virtual internships, and there's a concern that will this also kind of create some more inequities? Not everybody has equal access to, good, robust internet 24/7. And so I think specifically, since the focus of this conversation has been about equity, anybody have a thought on whether how we can sort of be careful that we don't let these kinds of new approaches actually further divide?
Yeah, I do think, Goldie, that's an issue. Another pillar of our impact initiative is actually digital access for that very reason. Look, I still believe that digital tools and technology are the great equalizer. In the end of the day, or whatever, whether you're growing up in traditionally underserved or disadvantaged communities, the lack of any kind of infrastructure to support this work exists, whether that's digital or analog. And so I do think, that technology has the promise to deliver a lot of what we're talking about at scale. And I think that's critically important. But maybe getting back a little bit to your point about the framing of this, I do think it's something that hasn't been discussed much, but I saw blowing up in the chat, was we're also trying to solve for generational issues. When I sort of think about my own professional journey, I was an English major who somehow ended up a banker. That wasn't because of studying Chaucer. That was because of a combination of two things, which was work experience and my parents' own experience and what they taught me. We can solve for the work experience, and that's, I think, a big part of what this discussion is about. We can't really solve for the parent issue, that gap that exists for so many who don't have that point to leverage. And so that's the thing that I think we're trying to sort of explore here, which is how do you help build, again, the infrastructure necessary to give people equal footing, equal chance to succeed.
Okay, great. We're winding down. I'm going to give each of you 20 seconds. So you get one last final thought on this conversation. One big takeaway that you hope folks to take from this conversation today, and then I'll take it back to Joe. Layla, sorry, you're on the spot.
No, that's okay. I guess my main takeaway is this is just the beginning of this conversation, and the data and the playbook are starting points for what I hope will become a more robust connection between employers and higher ed leaders.
Great. Andy.
You can't solve a problem without data and analytics. So many thanks to this team for the starting point that I think this will provide.
All right, Angie.
We often can forget how far we have come. And I would say the quality of this conversation, the quality of the data, the quality of the awareness and the transparency around what's really happening feels so different from just 5 years ago, where we were really, I think, trying to push up hills. So just that perspective setter that we are poised, we're not there yet. This is a big, long, intractable problem or set of problems we're solving, but that tools like this and this the conversation, the awareness, we are so far ahead. And I do think COVID accelerated that.
Right, David.
Thank you, everybody, for this panel. It was a wonderful conversation. I just want to say two quick things. One is just thinking about where we are now. It's important to remember the issues we have with the status quo. That is the reason we're working on these problems is that American higher education, as it stands, is an inequality machine already, and it's also declining in public in public sentiment. And I think that's because people, all of the rhetoric in America, rightly so, for many years was going to college is the way to achieve the American dream. And if you ask people what they want now, they want access to good opportunities and economic mobility. And it is our burden at colleges to give them that. And that's why we're here in this conversation. That's why I'm here in this conversation. I just think it's one of the most important things we can be doing for the next generation. And then the second thing is, please check out the College-to-Jobs map. Go look up your current area, check it out, mess around with the website, ask some questions and have them answered. And we are here as a resource to help troubleshoot, help answer questions. We're happy to take feedback about how to make it better. And as Layla said, this is just the beginning of a conversation. I want to thank you all so much.
Great. And actually, I'm going to take my own 20 seconds, redefine my question. Maybe we should be reframing this as about opportunity and not just about careers, but not, so it's not an either or, but opportunity is a big tent kind of a notion. And maybe that's the way to incorporate this and all the other values that we think are important in post-secondary education. Great. Thank you all, everyone on this panel, for being part of this conversation. Thanks to the Project on the Workforce for inviting me to be part of it. And I'm going to toss it back to Joe. And great.
Well, thank you, Goldie, for such a great job facilitating that conversation. I'm just going to underscore what David said. Please help join us in moving this agenda forward. Play with the tool, give us feedback, make suggestions, and if you've got opportunities that you'd like to pursue, let us know and we'll see if we can't find an opportunity to partner with you. So thank you all for participating. Spread the good word and keep doing the good work.